So here we are again with another vicious and indiscriminate attack by an unhinged Islamist maniac in broad daylight on the streets of our capital city. Two young people who were so much more than merely innocent victims, are now no more. They're dead. Two beautiful people whose potential was only just being realised were cut down in the cruelest manner imaginable. They were given no chance. Their murderer came out of nowhere and struck, it seems, at those who were trying to help others, and in their helping of others, left themselves unprotected. Because it is often the way that when you help others, you leave yourself vulnerable. When you offer help, you necessarily pass up the chance to screw someone else over. That's the nature of help, of compassion, of charity. It comes with the territory. And I don't know the details. Although I don't know the details, it seems as if Jack and Saskia were doing just that. They weren't spending their time climbing the greasy pole in order to get ahead. They were trying to help prison inmates get back into society. They were helping the kinds of people that most of us would rather forget or had written off. In their desire to help, they have made themselves vulnerable. It cost them their lives. No good deed, it seems, goes unpunished. Then what? Well, Londoners, it seems, are becoming not just inured to these kind of attacks. They are, as in the Borough Market attacks 2 years ago, beginning to fight back. Led by a Polish chef and guys who use fire extinguishers and, of all things, a narwhal tusk, they resisted and gave chase in a display of inspirational heroism. That was an example to us all. As a bloke who I follow on YouTube remarked, Londoners, won't start up a conversation with a stranger on the tube, but put on a suicide vest and start brandishing knives at them, and they're all over you. And they managed to overpower him until the police, on the ball for once, deployed the armed response units and took over. What followed looked suspiciously like an extrajudicial execution, judging by the videos I saw. Not that I exactly cried a river for that particular piece of shit in this case, but I suppose it would all come out in the wash. So after the shock of the tragedy came the welcome novelty that ordinary common or garden everyday members of the public had foiled probably greater bloodshed, followed by the less welcome but predictable expressions of sorrow and regret from the great and the good, uttering the usual platitudes about relatives being in their thoughts and prayers. This is not to denigrate those sentiments. After all, what else could they say? But this being slap bang in the middle of an election campaign, it didn't take long for the principal actors to start blaming each other for the situation, indulging in petty he said, she said games, and generally forgetting not only themselves and the electorate in general, but the victims and their families and friends in particular. What's worth remembering here is that the person responsible for this tragedy is precisely and only the vicious nutcase who did it. Whatever any of us may think of Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, Yvette Cooper or Priti Patel, it wasn't them that did the killing. That's akin to blaming the owner who left his bike unlocked for having it stolen. What would have been nice, however, would have been for Boris to phone up Jeremy Corbyn and say, look Jezza, come down to Downing Street and we'll make a statement together. That's what they should have done. And for Corbyn in particular, he should have taken the risk of being called, not entirely without justification, a terrorist lover. And if anybody might think this might be at all unfair to Corbyn, just consider how fair it is to have lost your 25-year-old son or your 23-year-old daughter to a senseless act of barbaric and medieval hatred. Being heckled and sneered at by the same people who have always sneered at you anyway is a small price to pay. And if in this instance Corbyn was criticised, Boris should have come to his defence. For that day only. As in the case of Joe Cox, all campaigning would have been suspended and they could re-enter the fray tomorrow. And that would have been different. genuinely different, and both men would have come out of it looking like better men, if only for a day. But they didn't do that, and neither did Yvette Cooper, who unwisely criticised the government only for Priti Patel to take this shot at the open goal that was Labour Party policy that allowed his unhinged Islamofascist out after less than half of his sentence was served, having seemingly hoodwinked all those in authority, by way of poetry no less, that he was a changed man. The rights and wrongs were batted about too early by politicians who couldn't or wouldn't control themselves, even whilst the bodies were still warm. But then the predictable once again took over. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, made another snivelling speech about how we should all love one another, how we shouldn't be divided, how London will not be cowed by terrorism, and blah, blah, bloody blah. We've heard it all before, and will no doubt whatsoever, hear the same trite and meaningless garbage again, and again, and again, and again. And once again we'll be told that we should, as we were told after 11th of September 2001 in America, after 7th of July 2005, and after Manchester and Parsons Green and Westminster and London Bridge again, and all the others too numerous to mention, that we should turn the other cheek. That we should hold our heads up, dry our tears, lay a wreath of flowers, light a candle and bow our heads for 2 minutes, and continue to love our neighbours. But what if those neighbours are plotting to kill us? Because Usman Khan was somebody's neighbour. What if they're waiting to plunge the knife in as soon as our guard is down? What then? Is our response, our readiness, simply to have an emergency pack of remembrance candles with us at all times? Is that it? And what precisely do we think that will achieve? Will it reform our enemies? Will it make them see through our forgiving humanity the error of their ways? Will they be thinking, look at these people, they are so forgiving and so gentle, let's not be mean to them anymore? Is that what they'll be thinking? Or will they think, these people are so weak and so stupid that we can do anything to them and still they forgive us? Much has been made of Jack Merritt's father, David, saying that he doesn't want his son's murder to be used as an excuse to detain people unnecessarily, which is a point on which I agree with him. Up to a point. That point being that terrorists, real terrorists I mean, like Usman Khan, rather than anyone the government doesn't like being labelled a terrorist, are a special case. But in the febrile atmosphere immediately after terror attack, like now for instance, the temptation is for everybody, from politicians to ordinary people alike, to throw all of our civil liberties overboard in our desire to see terrorist murders get what they deserve. And that's understandable. But that is a mistake, and it is an impulse that I think David Merritt was getting at. Because when we remove the rights and limit the freedoms of terrorists, there is no way of doing that without removing our own rights and freedoms. And to the controlling freaks that we call politicians, that is just peachy. They are always seeking more ways to control us, and a terrorist outrage is the perfect time. Tony Blair attempted to do just that when he sought to increase pre-trial detention from an already illiberal 28 days to a frankly draconian 90. Thankfully, after the Iraq War, people were beginning to see Blair for what he was, and a few principal MPs, remember them, like David Davis and the recently much maligned House of Lords, prevented him from doing so. The lesson here is that it is in the immediate aftermath of a terrorist attack that we must guard our liberties with extra vigilance, for it is in these days and weeks that they are at their most vulnerable. But as it is with all terror attacks, it is not the law that is at fault, but its execution. Usman Khan was sentenced to 16 years, which one might think was a fairly hefty sentence. If you go in at 25, you'll be seriously middle-aged by the time you come out. You think that losing the best years of your life will be enough of a deterrent. But with these deranged and vicious zealots, maybe not. And in any case, he didn't serve 16 years. He served less than 8, which you might get for burglary or theft. And some fucking genius thought that because he'd written a poem saying that he was a changed man, he was. That he was now a reformed character. Well, he wasn't, was he? But it appears that he still wasn't completely trusted, since he was made to wear an electronic ankle tag so that he could be apprehended whenever he was where he wasn't supposed to be. And that worked a charm, didn't it? But at least in London, perhaps the most surveilled city in the world, where countless millions of surveillance cameras keep a watchful and unblinking eye over its overwhelmingly law-abiding citizens, at least here, where we have been utterly robbed of our anonymity on the altar of security, at least here the security services can be keeping us safe from known jihadis. At least here the British public can rest assured that they won't have to rely on a Polish chef and 3 blokes armed with fire extinguishers and a narwhal tusk. At least Londoners can feel that, having swallowed the argument that they must be watched absolutely everywhere they go, that they are at least protected. But time and time and time again, the much vaunted surveillance state seems incapable of ever watching the right people. Turn right at a no right turn junction and the cameras never blink, and you'll be issued with a fine quicker than you can say police state. But have a knife wielding madman after you, and you're on your own, mate. As I've said countless times before, we have a government and an administration that is the worst of all worlds, both sinister and incompetent. Unless, of course, that surveillance isn't actually about crime or even about terrorism prevention, but is instead just about control. If that's the case, it's not incompetent. It just looks like it. I can't say that I agree with much else that David Merritt said, although I took it on board, since he has had an experience that I would give almost everything not to have myself. And I appreciated his sentiments in the way that he so obviously wanted to honour his son's memory. And I suppose that he wanted to validate his son's choices by not retaliating in a vengeful manner, and instead echoing what he believed to be his son's outlook. And that's better than I could do, I think. I might well be vengeful. I probably would be hateful. So when The Guardian plastered the quote, "Jack would be livid, his death has been used to further an agenda of hate," it was on the face of it just a seemingly straightforward bit of honest reporting. But if we dig a little, and only a little, if we just scratch the surface in fact, we can see the manipulating hand of the Guardian's editorial staff force-feeding us, as usual, their subliminal message. Don't blame the people responsible. If you blame them, you're the hateful one. Because it's us, isn't it, who have an agenda of hate. It's us because we're angry. It's not a deranged knifeman who was, it seems, also angry. Quite what he was angry about, we'll never know for sure. But he was angry enough to murder 2 strangers and quite possibly destroy another 24 lives in the process. But somehow it's our anger that is hateful. In fact, they probably even acknowledge that we are angry, only that we're hateful. Because that's what we are, isn't it? That's our natural state. We just hate. Well, in this case, they're right. I do hate. Like most of us, I didn't know Jack or Saskia, and I can't honestly express any grief for them personally since I didn't know them. But their families and friends will have enough of their own grief to deal with, without strangers like me trying to muscle in on it. But I do hate their killer, even though I didn't know him, and I do hate people like him. And I hate people who make excuses for him and for others like him, and I hate the damage he's done and will continue to do, even from beyond the grave. And I hate the fact that he's done his best to negate all the love that those two people have had bestowed on them, for a total of approaching 50 years between them. I don't think he will negate that for what it's worth, but his intention was to do just that, and for that he's worth hating, you slimy Guardian reporters. But I also hate him for the damage that he, and others like him, are doing to my still largely peaceful and free society. I hate him for bringing out the hawks, or rather the vultures, of control and surveillance, who will jump on the opportunity to say that the answer to this is more laws, more surveillance and much less liberty, despite the fact that all of their surveillance couldn't stop a known terrorist from doing what he did. But for all the reasons I hate him the most because he has, like all the ones that came before, caused us all to look suspiciously over our shoulders at our neighbours and compatriots and think, is this the day that I realise I didn't know you? Is this the day you plunged a knife in? So for that Guardian newspaper, more than for any other, is the reason I hate